This is a symbol of warning for the government, so they have to look at their people. When Indonesian mural artist Emas Mohammed Firdaus said this to CNN, he wasn't talking about Molotov cocktails, rifles, or even banners stitched with nationalist slogans. He was talking about a skull and crossbones flag from the Japanese anime One Piece, which in Indonesia has become a rallying cry for protesters who recently took to the streets angry at the exorbitant perks that members of parliament were receiving. And it's not just in Indonesia. All over the world, young people are flying this flag as a symbol of defiance. In Kathmandu, Nepalese Gen Z overthrew a corrupt government and burned down the parliament with the One Piece skull flying overhead. And even in Manila, the flag has been raised during recent anti-corruption protests. So how did this flag transform from a cartoon emblem into an international shorthand for we don't trust the elites, we don't trust the system, and we're ready to chart our own course? And perhaps, more importantly, where's it going to be flown next? Okay, now this is a question that we never thought we'd be asking on this channel. Honestly, we figured we'd save this one for WarFronts or something, our totally real spin-off channel where we analyze anime in the same way we usually analyze geopolitics. You're welcome. You know, the sort of Naruto's foreign policy failures, was last week's peace conference, a JoJo reference, that sort of thing. But since a cartoon skull and crossbones flag is suddenly the summer's hottest protest accessory, we think it's necessary to explain what One Piece is for those of you who are not familiar. Wilfred wrote this. I've heard of One Piece, but I don't know what One Piece is. I don't think I've ever seen anime in my life, I'm sorry. At its core, One Piece is a story about a ragtag crew of pirates called the Straw Hat Pirates, led by an eternally optimistic captain, Monkey D. Luffy. And when we say ragtag, we mean it. Luffy's crew has a reindeer doctor who can transform into a human-animal hybrid, a skeleton who uses music as a weapon, and a swordsman who often fights with 3 swords, 2 in his hands and 1 in his mouth. This is bizarre. Luffy's goal is straightforward. Sail the seas, gather a loyal band of friends, and eventually find the mythical treasure known as the One Piece, which will make him king of the pirates. But behind that straightforward premise is a sprawling epic that has been running since 1997. This is some Simpson shit right here. And has become one of the most popular pieces of fiction ever. It has spawned a global generation of fans and has a cultural footprint large enough to rival Western works like Harry Potter or Star Wars. While that may make it sound like an exceptionally popular but run-of-the-mill anime, One Piece has always aspired to tell a deeper story. Luffy and his friends often sail from island to island, liberating inhabitants from their tyrannical rulers. And that's not just on individual islands. Luffy is also fighting against the world government, the overreaching antagonists in the series. On paper, the government exists to maintain peace. In reality, however, it's an authoritarian superstructure that censors history, crushes dissent, and shields the grotesquely wealthy nobility known as the Celestial Dragons from public anger. These dragons live in floating palaces, treat ordinary citizens as disposable, and see slavery as their birthright. And you might be seeing how this might strike a chord with angry youth trapped in countries like Nepal or Indonesia, with high unemployment, low wages, and an elite who openly, and in the case of Indonesian MP Ahmad Saroni, call protesters against their rule the dumbest people on earth. Not that it's only One Piece's overshadowing story that touches a nerve with protesters, there's also the way Luffy deals with his fictional world's craven elite. In one of the show's most enduring scenes, Luffy encounters a celestial dragon, said Sharlos, at a slave auction where Sharlos is attempting to buy and enslave a mermaid, Cammy. When one of Luffy's allies, the fishman Hatchin, tries to intervene, Sharlos casually shoots him without a second thought, and everyone freezes in fear, demonstrating just how powerful the dragons are. But rather than cower like everyone else, Luffy simply punches Sharlos. And there are consequences. Attacking a celestial dragon brings the full weight of the world government crashing down on Luffy and his crew. Admirals, the military's most powerful weapons, are dispatched to hunt them down. The Straw Hats are scattered across the world, separated for 2 years, but the punch reverberates far beyond its immediate aftermath. We don't need to tell you why this scene is so electric, how it shows someone willing to strike back against untouchable power, consequences be damned. For Mateja Kovacic, Associate Professor of Asian Studies at Yonsei University in South Korea, this is why One Piece has become an enduring symbol among protesters. Speaking to New Lines magazine, he said, "They are fighting against the powerful on behalf of the weak." That's what made One Piece popular among Hong Kong protesters too. On the one hand, there's this systemic abuse of power by the elites, and on the other, a group of misfits brought together by the idea of following their own moral compass. And that idea of a group of misfits banding together is another key reason why One Piece is connecting with young protesters across the world. The Straw Hat Pirates don't have a rigid hierarchy and operate more as a gathering of equals than anything else. This mirrors how modern protest movements actually function. Young protesters have largely rejected traditional hierarchical structures in favor of distributed networks where individuals bring their unique skills to a shared cause. Artists create posters, influencers mobilize their supporters, and coders build apps to track government action. Hence why the Straw Hats flag continues to resonate with protesters worldwide. Young people standing up against injustice through decentralized, leaderless systems see themselves in Luffy and his crew. But understanding why One Piece resonates with protesters, that's only half the story. The more interesting question is how a Japanese pirate manga went from pixels on screens to flags flying over burning streets. The Straw Hats flag has appeared sporadically in protests around the world, but its first widespread use was in Indonesia. Surprisingly, it didn't begin with students storming parliament or activists calling for democracy. It began with truck drivers. Every year, in the lead up to Indonesia's Independence Day on August the 17th, truck drivers fly the country's flag as a routine display of patriotism, the red and white waving proudly as they traverse the nation. But this year, something changed. Truck drivers around the country began flying the One Piece flag, either in place of or alongside the Indonesian flag, as a protest against the increasingly difficult economic conditions. Rahmat, a local truck driver, told the weekly Indonesian outlet Tempo that he and his colleagues had adopted the flag as a peaceful way to demonstrate. Quoting him here, "This is purely an expression of aspiration. The hope is that the government not only listens, but also provides solutions. Don't let the lower income population continue to be oppressed." The truckers weren't just protesting the country's declining economy. They were also mad at a new ODOL policy introduced by the government. ODOL, meaning over-dimension overloading, refers to vehicles that have been modified to carry a load heavier than what they were initially meant to. According to the Indonesian government, ODOL increases the risk of accidents and the amount that the state spends on road repairs. The Indonesian Ministry of Public Works and People's Housing estimates that the state has spent more than 43 trillion Indonesian rupees repairing roads damaged by ODOL trucks. The drivers, on the other hand, often feel they have no choice but to exceed legal weight limits because cargo owners have come to expect it as a standard service. Gemilang Taragan, chairman of the Indonesian Trucking Entrepreneurs Association, told local outlet Berat Satu, and we'll quote him here, "If we tell clients our truck can only carry 10 tons, we get no jobs because others can haul 25 tons and beat us." End quote. The flag quickly spread among Indonesia's trucking community, as chronicled by the Instagram account HKPro78. And soon enough, the flag was all over the country, not just on trucks. Artists like Imas Muhammad painted the straw hat skull in graffiti across the walls of cities. Motorbikes drove past with flags tied to their rear racks, and boats along Indonesia's coasts began raising it on their masts, mirroring the straw hats. The governments, on their part, saw the One Piece flags not as an attempt by a desperate public to communicate with their leaders, but as an affront to the nation. Sufmi Dasko Ahmad, the nation's deputy House Speaker, called it a coordinated attempt to undermine national unity and divide the nation, while another lawmaker even suggested it could be treason. This reaction, according to regional observer Farhan Rizkwala, gave power to the symbol. On the publishing platform Medium, he wrote, quote, "By treating a cartoon flag as a threat to national security, they have inadvertently validated the entire premise of the protest. They have shown that the dream of Monkey D. Luffy, the simple, unwavering desire to be free, is one thing they truly fear." On the 25th of August, this long-simmering anger against the government culminated in the protests that we alluded to at the start of this piece, against the exorbitant perks that members of parliament were receiving. And the Straw Hats flag was at the center of it. From Indonesia, the flag went international, appearing next in Nepal among Gen Z protesters, then in the Philippines. It even crossed oceans into France, where protesters angry at the government's planned spending cuts were spotted not just carrying the flag, but also wearing straw hats. To be clear, the impact and extent of these protests has varied wildly. In Nepal, they overthrew the government. In Indonesia, they led to the firing of ministers and major policy changes. In France, they so far have only managed to demonstrate, once again, how locally unpopular Macron is. Still, the use of the flags across these protests underscores a key point. The protesters are from the same generation, have the same or very similar frustrations with their governments, and share a feeling that traditional political channels have failed them. However, even with these similarities, the flag bends, as all symbols do, to reflect the unique experiences of the people waving it. The Straw Hats flag isn't the first anime symbol used to advance a political cause. In 2019, during protests in Chile against austerity, protesters carried signs referencing the same anime that we did at the start, Naruto, as well as other anime such as Attack on Titan. One protester went viral for dressing up as Pikachu, a beloved character from the Pokemon anime, and standing firm in the face of water cannons and pepper spray from the government. Her act of cosplay defiance turned into something bigger, as she would eventually be elected to Chile's Constitutional Convention, the body in charge of drafting a new constitution for the country. In Thailand, protesters sang a politically charged parody of the Hamtaro theme song as they demanded the dissolution of parliament. Anime figures also made an appearance in Hong Kong during the anti-extradition bill movement. There, the protesters made reference to a wide variety of anime, from classics such as Doraemon to modern mega-hits like Demon Slayer. So, why is anime such an enduring part of protest culture? Well, according to Matt Alt, author of Pure Invention: How Japan's Pop Culture Conquered the World, it's because anime is often rooted in themes such as freedom of expression. Speaking to New Lines magazine, he said, "Their stories tend to be gleefully distrustful of authority, advocating free thinking and self-actualization, featuring wildly diverse casts, and taking great joy in empowering the weak, the outsiders, the weirdos, the people who don't fit in." The heroic themes and acts in anime often cause their fans to develop parasocial bonds with the characters that influence their personality and behavior. And it's not just anime. Protesters have long used other media as a source for symbols. Consider the Guy Fawkes mask, originally worn by children in 17th century England as a reference to the Gunpowder Plot, which was an attempt to blow up the House of Lords. It was resurrected by Alan Moore's V for Vendetta comic and the film adaptation, and became a rallying cry for Anonymous and Occupy Wall Street. Or the song Bella Ciao, originally an anti-Nazi and anti-fascist Italian folk song, it became a pop culture sensation after the Netflix hit Money Heist used it as an anthem and was used in protests across the world, including in the US, by pro-choice activists. Even Labubus, the viral doll sensation created by Hong Kong illustrator Kei Sing Lung, have appeared at anti-ICE demonstrations in Los Angeles. Such symbols are powerful because they compress complexity into something visceral. They don't require manifestos or party platforms, and in an age when images travel faster than policy papers, symbolism can outpace ideology. There's also the meme factor. Modern protest movements thrive on virality, and something as simple as a lady in a Pikachu costume facing down water cannons can net more eyeballs and generate more sympathy than any statement from a political party. So with all that in mind, what's next for the One Piece flag? Now, if history tells us anything, it's that symbols do not stay put. They migrate, they morph, and sometimes they fade away, only to return in unexpected ways. The Guy Fawkes mask went from Alan Moore's comic pages to the streets of London and New York. Bella Ciao traveled from anti-fascist partisans in Italy to TikTok remixes in the United States. The One Piece flag is now on the same trajectory. It has traveled from the pages drawn by Eiichiro Oda to the streets of Kathmandu, Jakarta, and Paris. Anywhere with the same ingredients as Indonesia and Nepal, a massive youth population that doesn't have enough jobs or opportunities to succeed, or a country where the elite feel like they are above the ordinary people, or anywhere where the government feels like they can control the internet like a light switch. That is a lot of countries, and as the summer of 2025 has proven, they can be anywhere from Asia to sub-Saharan Africa and even Europe. In Africa, our instinct tells us that Nigeria is a good candidate to be next. The country's unemployment rate is officially at 4.3%, but according to journalist Dwayne Mabachu, this doesn't tell the full story. Chronic unemployment and lack of wages are still a significant issue for the youth, who constantly express their dissatisfaction with the government on the internet. In Asia, Bangladesh, recently a victim of protests that toppled the government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, might be next. While the previous protests quelled much of the people's anger, the country is still in crisis. GDP growth is forecasted to fall to a 36-year low. Private investment has plummeted, inflation remains stubbornly high, and the national debt is mounting at an unsustainable rate. These are all ingredients for a potent street movement, and in Europe, the protests we saw in France could potentially be mirrored in Spain, where, according to Trading Economics, the unemployment rate rose to 11.36% in the first quarter of 2025, and the people recently took to the streets accusing the government of Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of corruption. Of course, these are all just predictions. We don't have a crystal ball, and it's entirely possible that none of the three nations we highlighted will see the flag of the Straw Hat Pirates flying above their streets. But the broader point is that these protests are unlikely to be contained to Nepal and Indonesia. So the real answer to what's next isn't a single country or a single protest, but rather the whole world as a younger generation pissed off by a lack of opportunity and accountability as it sets to redefine the people's relationship with the government. An act we're sure that Luffy himself would approve of. Thank you for watching.